Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into the world of makerspaces and seeing if they really do live up to all the hype when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one I see debated all the time online, so I'm excited to see what the research actually says.
Well, to get right to it, we're looking at this 2024 paper from the Strategic Management Journal.
Oh yeah, I think I saw that one. Do makerspaces affect entrepreneurship? If so, who, how, and when? Catchy title.
Definitely gets the point across. And that's exactly what we're here for, to look at the data and see if makerspaces actually cause more entrepreneurial activity or if there's something else going on.
Totally, because anyone can cherry pick a few success stories, but what about the bigger picture?
Exactly. So before we go any further, let's define what we mean by makerspaces. Are we talking about like a supercharged garage with a 3D printer or what?
It's a bit more than just that. The research actually ties the whole idea of makerspaces back to the whole maker movement thing that popped up in the early 2000s.
Oh yeah, right. Make magazine, maker fairs, all that. So were those early indicators that makerspaces could lead to businesses?
Well, the article focuses more on the big picture stuff, but it does mention some cool examples of companies that basically started in makerspaces.
Oh really? Like what?
What? There's Square, the payment processing company?
No way, the one Jack Dorsey founded?
Yep, that's the one. And the article talks about how makerspaces can be really helpful for hardware startups to get funding. And that's exactly what happened with Square. Their prototype that they apparently developed in a makerspace was like a big reason they got those early investments.
Wow, so it's not just a bunch of theory, it's actually playing out in the real world.
For sure.
Yeah.
And there are others too, like URBE, those foldable electric scooters.
Yeah.
Got their start in a makerspace. And then there's the Pebble Watch. That was huge on Kickstarter a while back. Another makerspace success. It's pretty interesting to see the range of stuff coming out of these spaces.
So we've got all these cool stories about companies starting in makerspaces, but I'm guessing it's not as simple as just dropping a makerspace in a city and then boom, instant startup success.
Right. Yeah, if only it were that easy. It's a lot more, complicated than that. Like, one of the big things the researchers had to figure out was how to tell if a makerspace was actually the reason a city had more startups, or if it was just because those cities were already good places for starting businesses. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like maybe those cities just had, a bunch of venture capital or something that attracted both makerspaces and entrepreneurs.
Exactly. It's that whole chicken and egg problem. So to get around that, the researchers they did something kind of clever.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So instead of just comparing cities with makerspaces to those without, they looked at something totally different.
Weather.
The weather. Now, I know you're going to have to explain this one. Think about it. If the weather's bad for an event, fewer people show up, right? So they applied that logic to maker fairs. They figured that cities that just happened to have lousy weather on the day of their very first maker fair probably had a slower start to their whole makerspace scene compared to cities that had, sunshine and rainbows that day.
Oh, that's pretty smart. Mm-hmm. So by looking at something as random as the weather, they could kind of sidestep all those other factors that might make a city attractive to both makerspaces and startups.
Yeah, exactly. So with that tricky weather method, they could be more confident about isolating the real impact of the makerspaces themselves.
Okay, so what did they find? Was there actually a measurable difference?
Here's the thing. Yes, but.
Uh-oh, there's always a but, isn't there?
It seems like having a makerspace did lead to more entrepreneurial activity overall, but it was really most noticeable for businesses that were making physical products, like actual hardware.
Oh, interesting. So all those examples we talked about before, Square with their card reader, URBE with their scooter, Pebble with their watch, those all make sense now because they were all about making a physical thing.
Exactly. Makerspaces give those kinds of startups a huge advantage. But for software companies or businesses that don't really need to build physical prototypes,
it wasn't as clear cut.
Yeah, just putting it mildly. The impact just wasn't statistically significant for those types of businesses.
So maybe makerspaces help a bit. Maybe they don't. We just don't have enough evidence to say for sure.
Right. And that's what makes this research so valuable. It's showing us where those assumptions hold up and where they don't.
So for all those listeners out there who are tinkering away on some new invention, this is where things get really interesting. It's one thing to say, hey, makerspaces can help businesses succeed, but how exactly does that work?
You hit the nail on the head. It's not enough to just say makerspaces work. We need to understand why they work. And this paper actually digs into that a bit. They found that makerspaces seem to help entrepreneurs in two main ways: resource provision, and social facilitation.
Okay, so there's some pretty big words. Can you break it down for us? Like, what do those actually mean in practice?
Sure, so let's start with resource provision because that one's a little more straightforward. Basically, it means that makerspaces give entrepreneurs access to all this expensive equipment they probably couldn't afford on their own.
Makes sense. Like, instead of having to shell out thousands of dollars for a top-of-the-line 3D printer or laser cutter, you could just use the ones at the makerspace.
Exactly, and that's especially huge for early-stage startups that might not have a ton of funding yet. It lets them actually build and test their product without breaking the bank. Plus, all those shared resources create an environment where it's okay to experiment and, maybe even fail a few times before getting it right.
That fail fast, fail cheap idea, right? It's way less risky when you're not sinking your life savings into every prototype.
Exactly. Okay, so that's resource provision in a nutshell. Now, social facilitation is a little more about the people and the vibe of a makerspace.
So less about the stuff and more about, like, the community aspect.
Exactly. Makerspaces attract these really diverse groups of people who are all passionate about making things, so you end up with this incredible pool of knowledge and experience.
So you could be struggling with some design problem, and the person at the next table over might have the perfect solution.
It happens all the time. And that kind of casual knowledge sharing can be so valuable, especially for new entrepreneurs who are still figuring things out. Plus, just being around other people who are working on their own projects can be super motivating.
It's like that whole rising tide lifts all boats idea, right? So we've talked about how makerspaces can be helpful, especially for hardware startups. And we've talked about how they help through resource provision and social facilitation. But I'm curious, is it just any entrepreneur who thrives in a makerspace, or there's certain types of people who really benefit from that kind of environment?
That is a great question. And the research actually found that makerspaces seem to be most beneficial for what they call new intentional entrepreneurs.
New and intentional.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
So new means they were just starting out on their entrepreneurial journey. Maybe they had an idea but hadn't actually launched a business yet. And intentional means they were serious about making their idea a reality. They weren't just messing around in their spare time. They were actively looking for resources and support to help them succeed.
That makes sense. It's like they have that fire in their belly and the makerspace gives them the fuel they need to get going. So as a final takeaway for our listeners today, what would you say is the most important thing to remember about makerspaces and entrepreneurship?
I think the biggest takeaway is that makerspaces can be a powerful tool for entrepreneurs, especially those working on physical products, but they're not a magic bullet. It takes hard work, dedication, and a willingness to learn and collaborate to really make the most of what they have to offer.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of makerspaces. If you're a budding entrepreneur with a brilliant idea, maybe a makerspace is just the spark you need to ignite your journey. Until next time, keep those creative sparks flying.